everybody. It's been a little minute since I've recorded one of these, and I was going to apologise for not coming on sooner, but I'm very much pro people just doing what is right for them and their lives when it comes to their creative practices. And I often read people's blogs or listen to people's podcasts where they apologise for not sticking to a sort of self-proclaimed time frame for writing or podcasting. And as the reader or the listener, I can honestly say, unless someone's been gone from my feed for a really long time, like months on end, I actually very rarely notice if somebody misses a week or two, or if some sort of self-proclaimed time frame of posting twice a week or posting once a month or whatever slips a little bit. I'm normally so wrapped up in what's going on in my own life that I actually don't really notice those kind of things. So I'm not going to come on and apologise. Sorry, not sorry. I am going to come on and say, life has been super busy in April and May. The renovation of our house is cracking on apace, and we're actually in the middle of getting the whole house rewired. So the entire house is in an absolute guddle. I'm not complaining, because I appreciate it's a very privileged place to be in, to be able to A, own property, and also B, have the funds available to renovate. But for those of you who have lived through a renovation before, you can probably understand that it is quite all-consuming, and it's been hard to find both the time to write or podcast, but also just the bandwidth, because any spare time is currently being spent sorting either the house or the garden. The garden's obviously a bit more joyful, but still it's a lot of sort of quite physically demanding jobs that I'm doing in the garden at the moment, because we're sort of setting up like the bones of the garden, like new fences, new borders, new raised beds, that kind of stuff. All of which is enjoyable, but it's not quite as joyful as like planting plants or making a pond, that kind of thing, It's like the structural foundations of the garden that in the longer run will obviously set me up in really good stead for my future gardening life. But in the short term, it is a lot of, quite physically demanding tasks that mean just end up knackered by the end of the day, to be honest. And I tend to write or podcast in the sort of mid to late evening. I like to get a cup of tea or a glass of wine, put on some Lo-Fi Girl on YouTube, set the scene, light a candle, that kind of stuff, and then really get into writing. And I might draft, between 1 and 3 posts in one go. And I just haven't had the bandwidth recently. The rewire especially is kind of sapping it out of me, because literally every room in the house is affected. At the moment, we're basically living out of our bedroom and the kitchen, and even that today was out of action, so we had to decamp to my in-laws because, the house just kind of wasn't livable. And I've still got another 2 weeks of that going on. So I don't really know when I'm going to get back to my sort of regularly scheduled podcast and blogging, but this is ultimately a hobby that I do for joy. I would like to develop my writing in the future into maybe something more kind of professional, but for now it is just a hobby. So I'm not going to beat myself up over not sticking to my sort of self-proclaimed routine. But I did want to pop on because I don't know if you can hear in the background, it is raining here. And that shouldn't be quite that unusual living in, as I do, in Britain, and specifically Scotland, where it does rain a lot. But it's been beautiful weather the last 2 to 3 weeks, 20 degrees plus, full sun all day. So I've had to be quite vigorous about watering the garden, which is not something I've really had to think about that much. And if I'm honest, because of all the aforementioned guddle in the house, I haven't really been as on it as I'd like to have been. So my fruit and veg is doing really well, but I've got a few shrubs that I either transplanted or planted new that I probably haven't watered as much as I should have done, so I really hope they don't suffer too much. But we just had a bit of a deluge, and I thought, you know what, I bet it'd be nice to record in the greenhouse right now, because you might get the background noise of the rain on the glass. I was also interested to know if my water butt setup is working, because I think the last time I was recording this, I was in the process of doing my greenhouse guttering, and I'm very pleased to report that you might be able to hear in the background the noise of the water tinkling into the water butt. I'm going to hold you up to the water butt, see if you can hear it. So if you can hear what sounded like somebody weeing, that is the noise of the greenhouse guttering filling the first water butt, which is very exciting. I actually ended up swapping out the water butt that I put behind the greenhouse. I originally had a 210 litre, which is just like your standard size, and I wanted to get an overflow one for the other side of the fence so that I could water the bed that runs down the side of my driveway, which is where my rhubarb lives. Rhubarb gets quite dry, which probably because I've sited it under a giant fir tree, which wasn't ideal, but it does get a nice amount of sun, which I know rhubarb likes, but I suspect that fir tree sucks up a lot of water from the soil, so a couple of times in the last month I've noticed the rhubarb looking really sad, and I've had to sort of rush out with watering cans. But because it's kind of round down the side of the house, it's not really near the tap, which makes lugging watering cans a bit of a pain. So I wanted to put a water butt the other side of the fence so that it could connect to the greenhouse water butt, and then it would be right opposite the rhubarb, and that would make watering the rhubarb a doddle. But I went back to B&Q to buy a second water butt, and they were out of stock of everything except the giant ones, which I think are 250 litres. And one of them was reduced to clear because it had a damaged tap. It wasn't hugely reduced, to be honest. They'd only knocked a tenner off, and I had to spend £6 buying a new tap, so it wasn't a huge amount of savings. But I brought that one home, and then had to spend like an entire day fannying on trying to get it to work right, because it's bigger than the original water butt, it was kind of too tall to just slot straight into where I had the original water butt set up. So then I had to return the stand. I had to build a different stand out of slabs and bricks. I had to dig a little hole underneath where the tap is so that the watering can sits lower than the level of the water butt. So it does work in the end, but it was a bit of jerry-rigging, and it's possibly, I think it looks fairly smart. Andrew doesn't think the sort of dug-out hole looks that great, but to be honest, it's right down the side of the greenhouse and nobody can see unless you're filling up a watering can. So yeah, I'm not going to complain so long as it's functional, which it appears to be. Currently in my greenhouse, looking at my inside greenhouse raised bed, which is nearly full. I've been sort of staggering filling it because compost is really expensive. As a side note, if anyone in the UK has some good sites for sourcing compost in bulk, I would love to know, because I've been looking online thinking it'd probably be cheaper for me at the start of the season to order like a ton bag of compost and just get it delivered rather than buying like individual bags from the garden centre. Currently the deal I'm using is the one at Tesco, which I think is 2 for £9.50 with a club card, which isn't bad really. It's what, like £4.25, or no, that's not right, £4.75 a bag. But I just feel like I'm really raking through it and it's getting a bit expensive, to be honest. So I was kind of holding out filling the last bit of my raised bed, so it's not full and it's much lower than I would like it to be, but it's got enough in it to keep my tomatoes going. So my tomato sun-fired flare is looking really good. Only a couple of the mormonds seem to have come through, but I've got them in and they look healthy. And then in between the tomatoes I've got 2 types of basil. So I've got basil sweet Genovese and red basil, and the red basil especially looks really good. I'm actually really looking forward almost to the end of the season, being able to look back and see what did well and what didn't, and then sort of iterating on it next year so that you can get hopefully bigger and better crops each year, you know. But yeah, the red basil looks really good. I've got a parsley and a coriander, both of which I bought from the supermarket and split, and they're both doing really well. And I have an oregano in here, which was actually 2 plants. One died, RIP, but the other is really thriving, so I'm glad. I think they were originally in the raised bed and they looked really sad, so I'm glad I moved them into the greenhouse because at least one of them has survived and is thriving. And then in between everything I've got some chilies, which are Hungarian chili mix, I think. So the idea is you get sort of different types of chilies. So I won't know until they fruit basically what chili types I've got. And they look like they're doing all right. And then still to go in, I've got some cucamelons, which I think are like a cross maybe, but I think they're a type of cucumber that are good for pickling, but they're supposed to have a sort of sweet crunch like a melon, and I think they're kind of melon striped. So I'm quite intrigued to plant them. I haven't planted them yet, but I think I'm going to plant them in between the tomatoes at one end of the raised bed. I'm just waiting for my last seedlings to sort of really take, because they only went into the soil a couple of days ago. And then I'll probably plant the cucamelons in between them, so I'll report back on what they're like. And then my mum very kindly gave me a voucher for a local garden centre for my birthday, because it was actually my birthday yesterday. And I went up to the local garden centre and I bought myself 2 blueberry bushes, which are currently looking really healthy. One's got loads of flowers on, so I'm really hoping that one at least produces blueberries. The other seems to have dropped a lot of its flowers, so I don't know if it's dropped them because its flowering season is finished, because the plant itself looks really healthy and it's got new growth on and whatnot, or whether it's dropped its flowers because it's sad because it got transplanted. But if anyone's interested, I'll put in the show notes what type of blueberries they are, because I don't have my notepad to hand and I can't remember, if I'm honest. I think one was blueberry Duke, I want to say, but I can't remember what the other one is. And that's on my outside raised bed. And then I've got a sage, which I transplanted from a different part of the garden, and I think is looking all right. It actually looks like it's thinking about flowering, so it must be healthy enough. A lot of its leaves went yellow after I moved it, and it was the same with the rosemary. That was a massive old rosemary that's actually been moved twice now, and I think it's in a place that it should be happier in, but it's gone quite yellow, and I don't know if that's just because it's stressed because I've moved it twice or what. But I was looking at it earlier and it does look like it's got 1 or 2 flowers, so it must be happy enough. But yeah, and then on the outside raised bed I've also got some yarrow, some nasturtium and some onions. And the onions actually look surprisingly healthy. I just whacked them in because they were the sort of dregs of a bag of onions that I think I might have accidentally brought with me from Edinburgh from when I shared an allotment briefly with a friend. And they were looking quite soft. Some of them were actually mouldy, so I had to get rid of a bunch of them. But the ones that looked healthy enough, I just whacked in the soil, and they all look like they're doing all right, actually. So I guess time will tell whether or not I get any usable onions. And then I planted nasturtiums in amongst them. And I've got a creeping rosemary as well, rosemary prostratus, which I initially planted down the side of the house, the walkway from the driveway to the front door. But people keep standing on it. I don't think they realise it's there. And after multiple times of me snapping at Andrew, keep the dogs off the rosemary, I decided I would just move it, because I was like, this is silly. It's clearly not in the right place if people don't even realise it's there, you know. And then the big raised bed is actually looking really luscious. I'm really delighted with it. There's not a huge amount that seems to be struggling. And if anything, I'm wondering in some cases whether I've planted things too close together. So it might be that I have to move things in time. But I'm sort of trying to take an approach to the garden that's quite relaxed and chill, because I tend to be the kind of person that struggles with being a beginner at something, that the vision in my head basically doesn't match up with my skill level when I'm a newbie at something. And so I get quite frustrated and I sort of beat myself up of like, oh, why is this knitted hat so ugly? Why has this thing come out too small? Like, why did I choose this fabric? It was clearly the wrong fabric. And I'm kind of not very nice to myself when I'm a newbie. I mean, I still do it even with things like knitting and sewing, which I feel fairly confident with now. Obviously, everybody makes mistakes picking the wrong fabric or the wrong yarn or the wrong size, and I still end up beating myself up over that. So with the garden, I'm trying really hard to have quite a chill approach of like, it's fine, I'll learn by doing. I know that of myself, that I'm the kind of person that learns by doing. So, for example, at the moment, we're watching the Chelsea Flower Show, and it's so inspiring. I don't know if any of you watch the Chelsea Flower Show, but it's so inspiring seeing all these incredible gardens and hearing all these people talk about it. But I can definitely start to compare myself and be like, oh, they all have this really clear vision of what they want, and I don't really. I read planning books and I look at websites and YouTube and blah blah blah, and I struggle to visualize what it is I want, because at this point I just don't know that much about plants, don't know that much about gardening. So it's hard, other than starting with the logical basics of, this area is shady, so I need to look at shady plants, or whatever. This area is exposed, so I need plants that will do well in those conditions. Like, other than matching up the conditions with the plant, beyond that, I don't really have enough knowledge to be like, well, this one is purple, so it'll go really well with this one, which is orange, or this one's tall and that one's short, so they'll be good in this combo rather than that combo. I don't have that degree of detailed knowledge. So I'm finding it quite difficult. I feel like I'm just stumbling around at this point, sort of buying plants when I see them, if they're cheap or on offer, or like tomorrow I'm going to the local botanical gardens is having a plant sale, which they apparently do every year to raise funds for their sort of charitable arm part of their business, which works with adults with special educational needs, helping them with like gardening skills and horticulture and whatnot. So it sounds like a really nice event, and my in-laws go to it every year. So my mother-in-law was like, oh, you should come to this and we'll meet for a coffee first and then we'll go to the plant sale. And I know I'll probably just end up buying a bunch of random stuff because I don't know what I'm really looking for. I know I want perennials because I don't want to have the hassle of sowing things from seed every year. I don't mind sowing things from seed. See, aforementioned compost is expensive, and obviously you do have to kind of nurture seedlings in a way that you don't necessarily with established plants. So I would definitely rather spend my money on perennials rather than annuals. Or if I'm buying annuals, I would rather prioritise things that I know will set seed, for example, and then I don't have to worry about like re-sowing them every year. I know the border that I'm currently working on is fairly shady during the day. I think you would describe it as semi-shade, because I think semi-shade is like 3 to 6 hours of sunlight a day, and I'm pretty certain that's what this area will get. So I'm prioritising sort of woodland, shade-loving plants. It's kind of an L-shaped border. Part of it runs along the side of the house and the other is on the boundary between us and the neighbours. And I've only just been able to start planting this up because we've just got a new fence put in, so I was waiting for that fence to go in, and then my plan was to prepare the border. So I'm probably about just under halfway done with that. Cutting it, I've got a rope edge marked, cutting the grass away, and then I'm raking the soil and removing as loads of stones. It's not great soil, to be honest, so I'm just removing as many stones as I'm able. And then I'm putting down a layer of cardboard to act as a sort of temporary weed suppressor, and then a layer of like green mulch, so like lawn clippings or moss or shredded wood material. And then when I run out of all of that stuff, I'm probably going to dig out some of my compost bin, which won't be anywhere near ready, but it can continue to compost down in the soil. And then I've got a bag of topsoil arriving some point early next week. So my plan is to put a layer of topsoil over the top of the green compost, the greens, and then I'll plant the plants into the topsoil. Because the benefit of the topsoil is it's sort of it's the same company I used for filling my raised bed. So I know it's good quality, like fine material, no stones, but it doesn't have a huge amount of like organic matter in it. So like it doesn't have insects or anything in it. So from that point of view, it's not great from a sort of soil health perspective. But then I figure if immediately under the topsoil there's this layer of sort of gradually decomposing green material, then that'll provide some of the nutrients and whatnot for the plants. And I bought some plants off a lady on Facebook Marketplace, which I've done before. She's called Angela. Shout out Angela if you're listening. I bet you're not, but just in case. So I just bought 3 lupins, 3 clematis, 2 of which I know are good for shade. The third prefers full sun apparently, but I think I am just going to put them all in together and just hope for the best. I've got a fern, and then I've got a little plant which she kind of threw in almost for free. I had 65p left in change, but because I brought the crates back from when I bought from her before Christmas, she gave me this little one almost as a freebie. And I can't remember what she said it's called, but it's like it looks like an ivy, but it's not an ivy, and it's got a sort of variegated red and green leaf. And she said it's really good for shade, and it'll sort of creep over the ground and act as ground cover, which is perfect. So that I'm going to plant alongside the clematis. And the clematis I've got one of them I've got this old holly tree that we took down a couple of months ago because it was too close to our house. We left the trunk because it acts as a washing line sort of pole. But the trunk itself, it's not the most attractive. So my plan is to sort of screw screws in a sort of spiral and put wire around it in a spiral, and then plant one of the clematis at the bottom of the holly tree and have it sort of gradually climb up the holly so it'll look pretty, hopefully, and hide the holly. And then the other 2, I'll probably put the sunny one there, which I think is Clematis Arabella. And then the other two, which have Polish names, one was Clematis Warsaw. I can't remember what the other one was, but also had a Polish sounding name. They're the ones that are good for semi-shade, so I'm going to put them up. Part of the new fence is also a new trellis, so I'm going to put them at the base of the trellis. Hopefully they will grow up the trellis. And I also bought a honeysuckle from Angela, so I'm going to plant that at the base of the trellis as well. So I've got 3 trellis poles, so I'm going to put one at the base of each trellis. And then hopefully over time, if they're big enough, they'll sort of grow up and sideways and spread and join each other. And if they're not, then what I might do is fill in the gaps with other climbing things. I would really like a dog rose, so if they have a dog rose at the Botanics tomorrow, I might look for that. And then my plan over the topsoil is I've basically gone through all my seeds, and my plan is I'm going to take all the annuals. So I've got, I can't tell you, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. It's in the house and it's currently pouring with rain, so I'm not going to run in. But I'm pretty certain I've got cornflower, marigolds, yarrow, teasel, lavender, although I might not mix the lavender in to this, but cosmos, 2 types of poppy, red and an orange. The orange is like the California poppy, and then the red is the like traditional poppy. Yeah, so I've basically got maybe like half a dozen, slightly more annuals, and my plan is, nasturtiums are in there, to just, excuse me, hiccups, mix them all in together and then scatter them across the topsoil, basically down the full length of this new border. I don't know if it's the right place because of the aforementioned part shade, but my thought is if some of them come through, that would be amazing. And obviously, especially if they're annuals that will just set seed and re-sow themselves. And if they don't, it's not the end of the world, because I'm very aware with seeds that they only last a year or two, right? So you can obviously save seeds for next year, but I don't want to end up every year. I can already see I'm going to end up every year with like loads of seeds left over to roll over to the next year. And I think I would rather be the kind of person that just sows the seeds and hopes for the best, you know? Because you can always buy more seeds next year, rather than I'm the kind of person who would hoard the seeds for like 5 years and then they would be dead and have no chance of germination. So I figure at least if they're in the ground, they've got some chance of germination, even if ultimately it's not the exact right place for them. Like hopefully some of them will cope, or at the very least maybe get spread around and come up somewhere else, who knows. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. I also took down the plum tree. So for those who listened to the last episode, I was mithering over whether or not to take down a plum tree, and I did do it. I feel really bad about it, if I'm honest, because all the birds used to sit in it and I had my bird feeders in it, but it was forming baby plums, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the plums start to drop, and then the baby Labrador would definitely spend the entire autumn hoovering up plums. And best case scenario, give herself stomachache. Worst case scenario, needs surgery to extract like 25 plum stones from her stomach. So in the interest of avoiding that, I cut it down. But what we've done is stripped off the branches, and I've started a dead hedge, which I might talk about in a future episode. But yeah, I've started a dead hedge. And then the trunks Andrew cut into kind of fairly long, like 1.5 metre, 2 metre long lengths. And my plan is to scatter them through this new border because it's semi-shade, and I'm planning on sort of prioritising woodland plants. I thought it would be nice if these sort of giant logs, a lot of them already have like moss and lichens and mushrooms and things growing on them. So I thought if they're in the border, and then when the topsoil goes on, they'll sort of be almost like half buried in the border. That'll obviously help with like soil health, encourage like beetles and other insects, maybe mushrooms, that kind of thing, although I'd have to be careful with the dogs, but I can keep an eye on that. And then obviously I can plant things like foxgloves and whatnot around and through them, and I think that would look really pretty and sort of emulate that kind of woodland forest floor kind of vibe. So I think I've got 4 or 5 of these. So I was thinking of having like 2 sort of piles. So I've made one pile already, sort of aesthetically pleasing pile, positioned so that the moss and whatnot is where you can see it most easily. And then I've got a few more logs that I'm going to create a second pile further down the fence. And I just thought it'd be really interesting, like over time obviously we can see them sort of biodegrade, and that would be interesting, but also as plants grow through them and over them, cascade over them, I think that would look quite pretty. So I will report back on what that looks like over time. But for now, I think I'm going to pop in because it has got quite chilly now that it's raining. I have a sort of secret project going on with a friend, which is another reason why I've had to kind of prioritise my creativity for that project, which I'm hoping I'll be able to tell you all about in the next month or two. But you may have noticed an improvement in the editing of this podcast because I've been learning some new skills. So yeah, hopefully the kind of knock-on side effect of this new project is that you might notice some changes, hopefully positive ones, to this podcast as well, just to make it sound a little bit clearer, kind of mop up any ums and ahs and long gaps, clean up any background noise, and add a little bit of music at the front and end. The intro and outro, as they say. So yeah, let me know what you think. As ever, would always love your thoughts. But in the meantime, I hope wherever you are enjoying either the good weather or the rain. I'm not going to lie, the joy of having a garden is that I kind of appreciate both now. So yeah, I will speak to you all soon. Bye.